The air in the main aging house has a weight to it, a scent you can almost taste. It's the sweet perfume of Angel's Share, the ghost of whiskey evaporated into the rafters, mingled with the damp, earthy smell of old stone and the sharp, tannic bite of white oak. For 3 generations, my family has called this scent the smell of patience. My name is Leo, and at 42, this scent is more familiar to me than my own reflection. I ran my hand along the rough surface of a barrel, its staves held together by sheer will and blackened iron hoops. Stenciled on the head in stark black letters was the birth date, October 17th, 2014. Inside, our 10-year-old dream was sleeping. The Alchemist's Reserve. It was more than just whiskey. It was a decade of my life, a tribute to my father, and the future of oak and iron distillery. The launch party was in 2 weeks. It was everything. A flicker of anxiety, sharp and unwelcome, cut through my pride. It wasn't about the whiskey. The whiskey was perfect. It was about Isabella. I could already picture her reaction when I got home, the faint, polite wrinkle of her nose. "Leo, you smell like the distillery again," she'd say, her tone light, but with an edge that called it the smell of stagnant ambition. The smell of being stuck. Have I been so focused on the legacy in these barrels that I forgot to look at the person sleeping next to me? The thought came and went, a ghost of its own. I pushed it down. Nerves before the launch. That's all. Everyone gets them. Talking to the barrels again. I turned. My Uncle Arthur stood in the doorway, a silhouette against the bright afternoon sun. At 65, he moved with the slow, deliberate certainty of a man who had spent his life working with his hands and trusting his gut. He was my father's partner, and now he was mine. He was the oak to my iron. "Just making sure they're ready for their big debut," I said, forcing a smile. He walked over, his eyes scanning the rows of barrels with a familiar reverence. He stopped beside me and patted the same barrel I'd been touching. "This one's special. Got your father's touch. All fire and patience." He looked at me, his gaze sharpening. "You seem distracted lately, son. Everything all right with you and Isabella?" I shrugged, a gesture that felt like a lie. "Just the stress of the launch. You know how it is." He grunted, not convinced. He leaned against a rack, his arms crossed. "I remember when you two first met. She was fascinated by all this. Said it was real. Authentic." He paused, choosing his words like he was choosing logs for a fire. "Lately, it seems like she's more fascinated with what's on her phone than what's in front of her. Remember, son, the strongest oak can still have rot on the inside if you don't pay attention." His words hung in the air long after he'd clapped me on the shoulder and walked away. Rot on the inside. The thought chilled me more than the cool stone walls of the aging house. Later that night, the house was quiet except for the rhythmic tapping of Isabella's nails on her phone screen. I came home to find her and her best friend, Chloe, huddled over a sleek laptop at our kitchen island, the screen glowing on their faces. They were scrolling through what looked like a real estate website, gleaming glass high-rises in the city, an hour's drive and a world away from here. When I cleared my throat in the doorway, the laptop snapped shut with a guilty click. "Leo, you're home early," Isabella said, her smile a little too bright. Chloe just gave me a tight, unreadable look. "Just wrapping things up," I said. "What were you two looking at?" "Oh, just browse. Daydreaming," Chloe answered for her, standing up to grab her purse. "You know how it is. A girl's gotta have goals." She gave Isabella a meaningful glance before heading to the door. After Chloe left, Isabella busied herself making tea, her back to me. The air was thick with things unsaid. To break the silence, I brought up the launch, the final preparations. She listened, nodding, but her eyes kept straying to her phone, resting on the counter. Then she turned, her expression shifting to one of practiced sincerity. "You know, honey, with the launch coming up, you're so swamped. I was thinking I could help take some things off your plate." "Oh yeah? Like what?" "The boring stuff. The finances." She came over and wrapped her arms around my neck. "We get so much paper mail. All those statements, bills, it's so old-fashioned. Why don't we switch everything to paperless? It's better for the environment, and I can manage it all online. It'll be our little project. You focus on making the best damn whiskey in the country." Let me handle the boring stuff. She said it with a kiss, her voice a soft, convincing melody. And I, a man who wanted to believe his wife still saw him as a partner, a man who was genuinely swamped and hated paperwork, agreed. It sounded so reasonable, so helpful. I had no idea I was handing her the keys to a secret world, a world where I was nothing but an obstacle. My mind flashed back to a family dinner a year ago. One of my cousins, well-meaning but clumsy, had toasted Isabella. "You're a lucky girl," he'd said, raising his glass, landing a man with a legacy like Leo's. Isabella had smiled beautifully, a perfect, polished smile. But I was close enough to see the flicker in her eyes. It wasn't gratitude. It was a brief, intense flash of humiliation, so quick I almost missed it. The look of someone who had just been told they were nothing more than a pretty accessory to someone else's life. I should have paid more attention to that look. I should have paid more attention to the rot. The night of the launch was electric. Our largest warehouse had been transformed. Twinkling lights were strung between the high rafters. Cocktail tables draped in black linen dotted the floor. At the center of it all, a long, polished oak bar showcased bottles of the Alchemist's Reserve, gleaming like liquid gold under the spotlights. The air, usually thick with the scent of grain, now buzzed with conversations, laughter, and the smooth notes of a live jazz trio. Distributors, journalists, old family friends, everyone who mattered was here. I felt a surge of pride, so potent it was almost overwhelming. I caught Uncle Arthur's eye across the room. He gave me a slow, proud nod. 10 years of work, of waiting, of believing. It was all here, in this room, in this moment. I was shaking hands with Mr. Tanaka, our biggest Japanese distributor, when I saw Isabella make her entrance. She wasn't just beautiful, she was weaponized. She wore a silver dress that seemed poured onto her, a stark, glittering contrast to the rustic warmth of the distillery. And she wasn't alone. At her side was Julian. I'd only seen him in pictures and videos on Isabella's phone. The self-proclaimed visionary, the life coach guru who preached a gospel of relentless self-actualization. In person, he was slicker, his tan too perfect, his teeth too white. He had the predatory confidence of a man who sold dreams for a living. My gut clenched. Why was he here? Isabella had sworn she was coming alone. She glided through the crowd, Julian's hand possessively on the small of her back. She didn't come to me. Instead, she navigated directly toward the small group of journalists I'd spoken with earlier. The MC was just about to introduce me for the main speech, the culmination of the evening. Then the unthinkable happened. Isabella, with a practiced smile, took the microphone from the stunned MC's hand. The jazz trio faltered, then fell silent. A hush fell over the room. Every eye was on her. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice smooth and confident, amplified throughout the cavernous space. "It's wonderful to see so many people here to celebrate a truly remarkable product. A product born of tradition, of patience, of staying in one place for a very, very long time." A few people chuckled, thinking it was a joke. I stood frozen, Mr. Tanaka's words turning to meaningless noise in my ear. "I want to thank my husband, Leo," she continued, her eyes sweeping the room until they briefly, coldly met mine. "I want to thank him for showing me what a comfortable life looks like. A predictable life. He built me a beautiful, comfortable cage." The silence in the room was now absolute, heavy, and suffocating. "But my soulmate," she said, turning to beam at Julian and taking his hand, "my visionary partner, Julian, has shown me what a courageous life feels like. A life without limits. And tonight, I choose courage." She dropped the microphone. It hit the stage with a loud, percussive thud that echoed like a gunshot. Then, turning her back on me, on my family, on our entire life, she and Julian walked calmly out of the warehouse, disappearing into the night. The world seemed to slow down. I couldn't hear the gasps, the frantic whispers that erupted around me. All I could hear was a high-pitched ringing in my ears. I saw the flashes of phones held up, capturing my public execution. I saw Uncle Arthur's face, a mask of fury and disbelief. I saw the shocked, pitying looks from my friends and colleagues. A single, Ice-cold thought cut through the chaos in my brain. So this is it. The rot just broke through the bark. The rest of the night was a blur of damage control. Uncle Arthur, a titan of strength, took the stage, his voice booming with a false cheerfulness, making a joke about impromptu performance art and steering the evening back from the brink of total disaster. I moved through the motions, a ghost at my own celebration, shaking hands and smiling with a face that felt like a cheap mask. Each sympathetic look, each whispered, "Are you okay?" was a fresh stab of humiliation. By the time the last guest had departed, leaving behind a graveyard of half-empty glasses and crushed napkins, the adrenaline had worn off, leaving a hollow, aching void. I stood with Arthur in the silent warehouse. The stage was empty. The lights felt harsh and interrogatory. "I'm sorry, Uncle Arthur," I managed, my voice sounding raw and unfamiliar. He put a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Don't you dare apologize. You did nothing wrong." His eyes, usually so full of warmth, were hard as flint. That wasn't a woman leaving her husband. That was a parasite dropping its host after it had its fill. He squeezed my shoulder. "Now we fight back. Not with noise, but with truth." The next morning, I was sitting in the polished mahogany office of Ms. Albright. She was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a sharper suit, recommended by Arthur as the legal equivalent of a surgeon. She didn't offer condolences or platitudes. She listened, her fingers steepled, her expression unreadable as I recounted the whole story. The public humiliation, the gradual changes in Isabella, the odd business with the paperless statements. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then she looked me straight in the eye. She threw the first punch in a street fight. "Leo," she said, her voice calm and firm, "we're going to win this in a boardroom. She wants you to be emotional, to be angry, to be rash. We will be the opposite. We will be methodical. We will be silent. And we will be prepared." She leaned forward. "Your only job for now is to be a ghost. No calls, no texts, no emails. You do not respond to her, her friends, or anyone else. Let her stew in the silence. Let her wonder what you're doing. Let her believe you're a broken man, sitting in the dark. Meanwhile, we will turn on the lights and see exactly what's in this room." Leaving her office, I felt something shift inside me. The raw, bleeding wound of humiliation was still there, but it was being encased in something else. Something cold and hard. A sense of purpose. 3 days later, the first call from Ms. Albright came. "Are you sitting down, Leo?" she asked. There was no preamble. "I am now. I've pulled the incorporation documents for Oak and Iron, as well as the deeds for all associated properties. It's all held within a family trust. As your uncle suspected, the only trustees and beneficiaries are you and him." "Okay," I said, not sure what the point was. "The point, Leo, is that Isabella's name isn't on a single asset. Not the land, not the distillery, not the brand. Nothing. According to the law, she has no claim to the business." I was stunned into silence. "But we set that trust up together a few years ago." "Yes," Ms. Albright said, and I could hear the grim satisfaction in her voice. "And do you remember why?" The memory surfaced, foggy at first, then sharp and clear. Isabella, sitting across from me at the kitchen table, looking earnest and intelligent. "It's for protection, honey," she'd said. "If my consulting business takes on debt or gets sued, this structure ensures they can never come after the distillery. It protects the family legacy." It had been her idea, her brilliant, protective idea, a lie so clever it had become her own undoing. She outplayed herself. I whispered. "Oh, it gets better," Ms. Albright continued, her voice dropping. "Or worse, depending on your perspective. I did a preliminary credit check. She didn't just convince you to go paperless. She's been busy." My stomach tightened. "What did she do?" "She used her access to the digital accounts to take out several commercial loans against distillery assets, smaller equipment, vehicles. Things she thought you wouldn't notice were leveraged. She forged your digital signature. As of today, she has personally drawn down over $250,000 in debt, all secured by your property." The phone felt heavy in my hand. The air in my lungs turned to ice. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It wasn't just a divorce. This was a long, calculated con, a systematic plundering. The pain in my chest, the grief for my dead marriage, didn't disappear. It crystallized. It turned into something else, something cold and dense and powerful. It turned into rage, but was a quiet rage, a patient rage, the kind of rage you can age in a barrel for 10 years until it's ready. I looked at my own hands, the calluses on my palms from a lifetime of real work. She wasn't my partner. I thought, the word's now a certainty. I was her project, her stepping stone, and she had just found out her stepping stone was actually a goddamn mountain. For 2 weeks, the silence was absolute. My phone, which had initially lit up with a handful of half-hearted, probing texts from Isabella's friends, "Hey, hope you are okay," went dark. I followed Ms. Albright's advice to the letter. I was a ghost. I went to work, I ate, I slept. I spoke only to Arthur and my lawyer. On the outside, I was a machine of routine. On the inside, a quiet, cold engine was turning. Then, the official declaration of war arrived. Not as a text, but as a thick, creamy envelope delivered by courier. It was from a high-powered, high-priced law firm in the city. A firm that likely cost more per hour than I made in a week. Inside, the letter was a masterpiece of arrogant fiction. It detailed Isabella's immense emotional and professional contributions to the success of Oak and Iron. It claimed her visionary guidance was instrumental in our recent growth. It concluded with a demand that was breathtaking in its audacity: the immediate sale of the distillery and all associated assets, with a 50-50 split of the proceeds, plus ongoing spousal support to the tune of $10,000 a month to maintain a lifestyle to which she had become accustomed. I read the letter twice. The first time, a flicker of the old, hot anger sparked. The second time, I let out a short, humorless laugh that echoed in the quiet office. The absurdity of it was almost beautiful. She was playing a high-stakes poker game, demanding half the pot, without realizing she'd been dealt a dead man's hand from the start. "She has no idea," I said to Ms. Albright over the phone after forwarding her the letter. "None whatsoever," my lawyer confirmed. "This is a gift, Leo. This is her, on official legal record, overplaying her hand so extravagantly that it borders on delusion. We will file our response in due time. For now, you continue to be a ghost." But I was tired of being a ghost. It was time to become a hunter. I remembered a name from the wreckage of Julian's online presence, a name that had appeared in angry comments on a now-deleted article about one of his failed real estate seminars. Mark, a contractor who claimed Julian had stiffed him for over $60,000. It took me a day of digging, but I found him. I met him in a dingy diner halfway between my town and the city. He was a man in his late 40s with tired eyes and a handshake like a vice. He was wary at first, but when I told him who I was, his eyes lit up with a bitter fire. For an hour, he laid it all out. Julian was a master of illusions. He'd create an LLC for a new project, take huge deposits from investors and contractors like Mark, then dissolve the company and declare bankruptcy, leaving everyone with nothing while he walked away clean. He'd done it 3 times in the last 5 years. "He's a leech," Mark said, stirring his coffee with a vicious energy. "He finds people who are desperate for a shortcut to success, sells them a fantasy, and bleeds them dry. Your wife, sorry to say it, man, she's not his partner. She's his latest mark, and her 250 grand is probably already gone." I left the diner with a folder full of documents Mark had given me. Invoices, bounce checks, correspondence. More pieces of the truth. I sent it all to Ms. Albright. My patient rage now had a direction. The showdown came a week later. I was in the bottling facility, overseeing a run of our standard bourbon, the noise of the machinery a comforting, rhythmic roar. The doors flew open, and Isabella stormed in. She looked different. The confident, glittering woman from the party was gone. There were faint, dark circles under her eyes, and her movements were sharp and jerky with an anger that was clearly fueled by anxiety. The silence from my end had obviously gotten under her skin. "Are you kidding me?" she yelled over the noise of the conveyor belt. "Are you seriously going to ignore my lawyer? Do you think this is a joke, Leo?" I calmly hit the emergency stop button on the line. The roar of the machinery died, replaced by a sudden, ringing silence. I turned to face her, wiping my hands on a rag. I didn't raise my voice. "Hello, Isabella." "Don't you hello, Isabella me," she shrieked, her voice echoing in the vast space. "We had a life. A partnership. You can't just cut me out. The law says I get half." "The law is a funny thing," I said, my voice unnervingly calm. I started walking toward my office, and she followed, still ranting about her rights, her contributions, her sacrifice of living in this dead-end town. Inside my office, I walked behind my father's old oak desk. It felt like a fortress. She stood in front of it, breathing heavily, her hands on her hips. "We are selling this place, and I am getting what I deserve," she spat. I didn't answer. I simply opened a drawer and pulled out a thin file folder. I slid it across the polished surface of the desk toward her. "There's nothing to sell, Isabella," I said quietly. "You made sure of that yourself." She looked at me, confused, then down at the folder. She opened it. The first page was a one-page summary of the Oak and Iron Family Trust, with the names of the two trustees, Leo and Arthur, highlighted in yellow. Her face went blank with confusion. "What is this? This isn't right. It's the trust you convinced me to set up 3 years ago to protect the legacy," I said. "Your name isn't on a single brick of this distillery." The color started to drain from her face as the first layer of her reality began to crumble. "But my contributions, our marriage." I reached back into the drawer and pulled out a second, thicker folder. I placed it on the desk next to the first one. This one contained copies of the loan agreements she'd forged. "Your contributions are well documented, don't worry," I said, my voice dropping to just above a whisper. I tapped the folder. "Your name may not be on the business, Isabella, but your signature is all over these felonies." She stared at the second folder, then back at my face, her eyes wide with a dawning, pure terror. The arrogant anger was gone, replaced by the primal fear of a trapped animal. She finally understood. She finally saw the cage she had built, not for me, but for herself. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The entire foundation of her grand escape, her new life, her courageous future, had just turned to dust in the silence of my office. The collapse was faster than I could have imagined. Armed with the information from Mark and the evidence of Isabella's own fraud, Ms. Albright didn't just respond to Isabella's lawyers. She went on the offensive. A few carefully worded letters to the banks holding Isabella's fraudulent loans, mentioning an internal audit and potential signature discrepancies, was all it took. The banks, terrified of liability, immediately froze her accounts and called in the loans. Simultaneously, news of Julian's shady business practices, bolstered by a formal complaint from Mark and other contractors, hit the local business journal. His house of cards, built on charm and other people's money, folded overnight. I heard through the grapevine that he'd vanished, leaving Isabella holding the bag for his lavish lifestyle and their shared debts. The visionary Soulmate had been a mirage. 3 months after the showdown in my office, I was sitting in a small, quiet cafe downtown, a place I'd always liked for its lack of pretension. I was reading a book, enjoying the simple luxury of a Saturday afternoon with no agenda, when the bell on the door jingled. I glanced up, and there she was. The transformation was shocking. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by simple jeans and a sweater that looked worn. Her hair didn't have its expensive, salon-perfect shine. Her face, without its usual mask of makeup, looked tired and shockingly young. Her eyes, when they found mine, were filled with a desperate, hunted look. She hesitated, then walked slowly to my table. "Leo," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Can I talk to you for a minute?" Against my better judgment, I nodded to the empty chair opposite me. She sank into it, her hands twisting the strap of her worn purse in her lap. I've lost everything," she began, her voice trembling. "The banks. Julian is gone. My parents won't even speak to me. I'm staying on Chloe's couch, but she wants me out." I just sat there, sipping my coffee, saying nothing. I was her last resort. The man she'd publicly humiliated had become her final court of appeal. Tears began to well in her eyes. "Leo, I know I don't deserve it. I know what I did was unforgivable. But I am begging you. Don't press charges. Don't send those loan documents to the DA. It will destroy what's left of my life. I'll do anything. I looked at her, and for the first time, I felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, just a profound, empty distance. The woman I had loved, or thought I had loved, was gone. Maybe she never existed at all. I was looking at a ghost. The ghost of a woman I thought I knew, chasing the ghost of a life that never existed. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a single document. It was a divorce settlement. It was clean and brutal. It stipulated that she waived all claims, past, present, and future, to any asset and assumed full responsibility for her personal debts. In return, the matter of the fraudulent signatures would remain a private one between us and the banks she had defrauded. I pushed it across the table. This isn't a negotiation, Isabella. It's an exit, I said, my voice even and devoid of emotion. Take it and disappear from my life. Or don't, and disappear into the legal system. Your choice. Her shoulders slumped in utter defeat. Through her tears, she took the pen I offered and signed her name. The final act of our marriage was a surrender. 6 months later, the distillery was thriving. The Alchemist Reserve had won 2 major international awards, and orders were pouring in. The hole Isabella had blown in our finances was plugged and was already starting to heal. The dark cloud that had hung over my life for so long had finally dissipated, leaving behind clean air and a quiet sense of peace. I hadn't started dating. I wasn't ready. Maybe I wouldn't be for a long time. Instead, I poured my energy back into my work, into my friendships, into rediscovering the simple rhythms of my own life. I had learned a lesson that had been aged in pain and pressure, a lesson far more potent than any whiskey. I learned that trust, once broken, can't be redistilled, and that some people will try to burn down your world just to warm themselves by the fire. That evening, I was standing on the hill behind my house, looking down at the lights of the distillery twinkling in the valley below. Uncle Arthur walked up beside me, handing me a heavy glass tumbler with a generous pour of the Alchemist's Reserve. We stood in comfortable silence for a long time, just watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. "To oak and iron," Arthur finally said, raising his glass. I swirled the amber liquid, watching it catch the last light of day. I took a sip. It was complex, fiery, with a smooth, long finish. It tasted of patience. It tasted of strength. It tasted of truth. I raised my glass to meet his. "To iron," I said.